Look at this desert. This is a real aerial photograph of northwestern Saudi Arabia. All of those long rectangles among the stones are not roads, not building foundations, and not the remains of a modern military site. People built them roughly 7,000 years ago. And this is a real photograph from the excavation of one of those rectangles. Beside an upright stone slab, archaeologists found animal horns. Not in a rubbish pit, not beside a cooking fire. They were deliberately carried inside and placed beside the stone. And people came back here more than once. But the rectangles are only the beginning. Here is another real photograph from the same enormous region of Arabia. Two stone lines stretch across the desert and converge on a trap whose full design is almost impossible to understand until you rise into the air. And here you are looking at a real aerial image of an ancient route. Hundreds of circular tombs stand on both sides of it. It is almost as if someone deliberately turned the desert into a road of the dead. That creates a very strange picture. No cities, no writing, no kings, no state in the form we would normally recognize. And yet, people are already building hundreds of enormous sanctuaries, coordinating hunts across distances of several kilometers, and marking routes between oases with thousands of graves. So who did all of this? Why would mobile herders need architecture older than the Egyptian pyramids? And why does a region that was treated for decades as almost empty now look like one of the most highly organized prehistoric landscapes on Earth? Let us begin with the name. Mustatil simply means rectangle in Arabic, an impressively boring name for structures that seriously disrupt the convenient old picture of ancient Arabia. For a long time, researchers could see them on old aerial photographs and satellite images, but no one really understood what they were. From ground level, many of the walls rise only slightly above the surface. In some places, the stones have collapsed. In others, they were taken away and reused in later structures. And only from above does the shape suddenly appear. You are now looking at a real vertical photograph of a mustatil about 140 meters long. It was found roughly 55 kilometers east of AlUla. Take a moment to judge the scale. The structure is longer than a football field, but its side walls are so low that they clearly could not contain a large herd. And this is where the first convenient explanation appears. Perhaps it was simply an animal enclosure. That sounds reasonable. But then, why build walls hundreds of meters long that are almost symbolic in height? Why leave an entrance only about 1 meter wide? And why construct a separate, tiny chamber at the far end? Here is a real photograph of an almost complete mustatil. You can clearly see two massive platforms at opposite ends, the long walls running between them, the open central courtyard, and an entrance at one end. More than 1,600 of these structures are now known. They are spread across more than 300,000 square kilometers. In other words, an area almost the size of Italy. And some individual mustatils are as much as 600 meters long. So this is not one strange structure, and it is not a random pile of stones. Building each one of these rectangles meant far more than drawing a line in the sand with a stick. Someone had to select the location, gather enough people, find suitable stone, carry it across uneven ground, build two long parallel walls that met the correct platforms, and do all of this without ever seeing the structure from above. One person could not build something like this. One family probably could not do it either. So people had to agree on responsibilities: who carried stone, who worked on the walls, who prepared the animals, and who arrived for the ritual itself. Someone repeated the same architectural idea again and again across hundreds of kilometers. And this is a real photograph of several stone platforms standing near one another. Look closely. This tradition was widespread. People did not try to make one rectangle, decide it was a bad idea, and forget about it. Different groups knew the same general form. They understood where the entrance should be, where the main section belonged,
and how the whole structure should be positioned within the landscape. But how did scattered groups of herders share a single architectural instruction? This real image shows a system of adjoining stone cells near the base of one complex. The stones form separate compartments, and some of those compartments are connected with upright slabs. That is an unusually complicated design for an ordinary fence. Why would people need all of this if, according to the older interpretation, they were simply moving livestock from one place to another? The answer only begins to appear after excavation. In front of you is a real photograph of the main chamber of an excavated mustatil. Several upright stones stand against the rear wall. Researchers interpret the most prominent one as a betyl, a sacred stone, literally a house of the deity. An important warning: we do not know the name of that deity. We also cannot reconstruct the complete ceremony, and we are not going to present an attractive reconstruction as proven fact. But the arrangement of the discoveries inside the chamber looks far too deliberate to dismiss as an accident. The chamber itself is tiny, approximately 3 meters by 3 meters. Put 5 people inside and it already becomes crowded, but the open courtyard in front of it could hold a much larger group. That gives us a pattern that feels strangely familiar. Everyone gathers outside. Then, a small number of participants enter the sacred area and perform whatever action brought people there from distant places. But what exactly were they doing? Here is a real photograph of a cattle horn beside an installed stone slab. It is lying precisely where ancient people left it, not in a domestic hearth, not in a kitchen, not in a heap of bones left after an ordinary meal, beside the central stone, inside the ritual chamber. And this is another real image from the same part of the excavation. Another horn, once again beside an upright slab. Archaeologists found several layers of similar offerings. Between those layers, sand had time to accumulate. Time passed. Then people returned, bringing new pieces of skull and more horns. So this was not one accidental meal, it was a repeated action. In this real close-up photograph, you can see a concentration of remains beside the stone. The complex contained almost 250 identifiable animal fragments. The overwhelming majority came from cattle, but there were also goats, and even one fragment from a gazelle. And this is where the desert starts behaving like something other than a desert. You cannot drive cattle for weeks across a waterless field of stone. They need grass, reliable water, proper grazing land. The simple fact that local people kept cattle tells us that the climate was different. 7,000 years ago, Arabia was going through a wetter period. Lakes, seasonal pools, and grazing areas appeared across parts of the region. But we should not take that attractive image too far. This does not mean that all of Arabia was a green savanna throughout the entire year. Water may have appeared only seasonally. Lakes could shrink. Rainfall could be irregular and unpredictable. And that may be exactly why a shared ritual mattered so much. When good grazing land exists for only part of the year, separate groups meet near water, exchange information, negotiate routes, and renew their relationships. A huge stone structure becomes a fixed meeting point that no one can mistake for anything else. It was not an endless green paradise, of course, but it was certainly not the modern landscape, where life clings to every available water source. You are now looking at a real photograph of several horns on a collapsed stone bench. They had been placed together and then covered with reddish clay. Notice the sequence of actions. Select them, carry them in, arrange them, seal them. That is no longer rubbish. It is a procedure, and possibly an offering. This is a real laboratory photograph of a large ancient horn removed from a mustatil. By studying the teeth and horns, researchers identified several animals of different ages. Some of the cattle were fully grown. A number may have been adult males with especially powerful horns. In other words, people were not selecting the least noticeable remains. Quite the opposite. They brought the parts that immediately attracted attention.
Here's another real specimen, a well-preserved curved horn. On some of the remains, researchers found evidence of chopping, cutting, and exposure to fire. That means the animals may have been slaughtered and butchered. Some of the meat may have been eaten during a communal feast. But people did not carry every part into the chamber. They selected mainly the upper parts of skulls and the horns, the most visible and, perhaps, the most symbolic elements. Imagine the scene. Several families or groups of herders arrive from different directions. They bring animals with them. They gather in the courtyard. They hold a shared feast. And then a smaller group carries the horns into the little chamber and places them beside the sacred stone. Was this religion? An alliance between different groups? A display of wealth? A way of declaring, we belong to the same world? For now, there is no certain answer. In front of you is a real photograph of 2 connected chambers after excavation. The main area, a secondary chamber, and the stone partitions. Once again, none of this looks much like an animal enclosure. It looks more like a place people returned to in order to repeat a ritual. The authors of the archaeological study cautiously use the word pilgrimage. Not in the modern religious sense, and not as a proven conclusion. But no settlement has been found nearby that could permanently house all of the builders and participants. So people may genuinely have traveled here from other places. Perhaps they returned over the course of 1 or 2 generations, and in that case, a mustatil was not simply a structure. It was a gathering point. This is a real photograph of a stone tool only about 6.5 centimeters in diameter found in the main chamber. It has a transverse groove and visible traces of use. It does not prove that this exact object was used to build all of the long walls, but it is a powerful reminder of the essential point. All of this work was done by hand, with simple stone tools, through collective labor. No trucks, no plans drawn on paper, no central administration allocating a budget and sending in a workforce. Apparently, they did not even have a convenient builders group chat. So how did one architectural idea spread across hundreds of kilometers? To understand the scale of the problem, let us examine another discovery. This is a real aerial photograph of a desert kite. Modern pilots gave these structures that name because, from above, their shape resembles a flying kite. Two long stone lines converge on a large enclosure with pit traps around its edges. Some of the guiding walls extend for several kilometers. They did not need to be tall. Their purpose was to guide running animals in a particular direction until the herd entered the trap. Now imagine not the construction, but the hunt itself. People had to be positioned across an enormous area. One group drove the herd forward. Another prevented the animals from escaping sideways. Someone waited at the narrowing point. Others stood ready near the pit traps. One mistake, and the entire herd could turn away. So every participant had to understand the overall plan, the signals, and their own exact role. From ground level, a person could see only separate rows of stones. Sometimes one section of wall, sometimes just a bend in the line. The complete design existed inside the builders' minds. And this is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary. You are looking at a real aerial photograph of a site in Jordan where a stone slab with an engraving was discovered. The location of the find is marked in the image. Among hundreds of stones, the slab could easily have looked like an ordinary broken rock. But there was a diagram carved into its surface. And this is a real photograph of that same slab placed upright after its discovery. It is about 80 centimeters long and weighs roughly 92 kilograms. So this is a substantial object. You cannot casually carry it under one arm. And it is difficult to dismiss it as a random scratch made beside a path. One side contains a carved image that, for a long time, could have looked like nothing more than a strange pattern. But it was not a decorative pattern. You are now looking at a real full view of the engraving. Outlines, converging lines, a central area, circular depressions around the edges.
Researchers compared the image with nearby traps and realized that it was a plan of a specific desert kite. More remarkably, it was drawn at a scale of approximately 1 to 425. Think about the task involved. You are standing on the ground. The walls disappear toward the horizon. Parts of them are hidden by the terrain. There is no drone, no map. You have never seen the structure from above, and yet you are able to assemble the entire design mentally, reduce it by hundreds of times, transfer it onto stone, and preserve the proportions. How? This is a real photograph of the second discovery, this time in Saudi Arabia. Among broken rocks at the foot of a cliff lies a huge boulder, almost 4 meters long and more than 2 meters wide. Unlike the Jordanian slab, this is not something even the most enthusiastic archaeologist could simply carry into a museum. And it also contains plans. Here is a real close-up view of the boulder's surface. 2 trap designs were carved into it. One is better preserved. The second has been badly damaged by erosion, but the form is still readable: guiding walls, a star-shaped central area, and circular pit traps. Nearby stands a real, enormous kite. Its longest guiding wall extends for approximately 3 kilometers and 380 meters, while the enclosure covers more than 1 hectare. The similarity was so strong that researchers consider this nearby kite the most likely original represented in the carving. The scale is approximately 1 to 175. And this is a real scientific tracing of the ancient engraving. The circles at the ends are probably pit traps. These images have been described as the oldest known realistic scale plans of human-made megastructures. Not merely a picture of a hunt, not little human figures driving gazelles. A technical diagram of a structure extending across kilometers. What was it used for? Perhaps builders used it to explain where the walls should go. Perhaps it helped assign positions during a mass hunt. Perhaps it allowed one group to pass complex knowledge to the next. We do not know for certain, but one conclusion is now difficult to avoid. People without writing could think spatially. They could coordinate large groups, and they could preserve complicated information outside the limits of human memory. Now let us move forward by several thousand years.
the climate becomes drier. The enormous hunting systems and ritual rectangles belong to the past. But the habit of organizing the landscape does not disappear. Instead, the new network is literally made from the dead. In front of you is a real photograph of a funerary avenue descending toward a water source and the green strip of an oasis. That detail matters. These routes did not lead nowhere. They connected permanent water sources, grazing land, and areas used during the seasonal movement of herds. So the ancient road is explained not by mystery but by water. But why place graves along it? This is a real aerial photograph of so-called pendant tombs. The circular part contains a burial chamber or stone mound, while a long stone tail extends toward the root. From above, they look a little like keys, or like enormous pendants laid out across the desert. In AlUla and Kbar, researchers documented more than 17,800 tombs with long tails. Around 11,000 of them form part of funerary avenues, chains of monuments oriented along routes. Consider the scale. This is no cemetery beside a single village. It is a regional system. And here is a real photograph of an entire collection of geometric complexes. Circles, triangular tails, parallel lines. This is not one grave placed wherever a person happened to die. The architecture follows a shared route and would have been clearly visible to everyone passing through. Why would ancient communities turn a road into a cemetery? Perhaps the graves demonstrated a group's claim to land and water. Perhaps they reminded travelers, our ancestors lived here, and this route belongs to us. Or perhaps the road itself was understood as a place shared by the living and the dead. There is also a purely practical effect. In an open desert, stone tails and circular mounds can be seen from far away. A traveler understands that people have passed through this place before.
Somewhere ahead there should be water, grazing land, or an oasis, but each marker says more than "the road is here." It also says, "Our family was here before you." But we still cannot know that with certainty. You are now looking at a real aerial photograph of a long chain of tombs. It crosses the landscape almost like a modern highway, except that instead of streetlights, fuel stations, and road signs, there are monuments to the dead. Some routes may have connected Kbar and AlUla, which are roughly 170 kilometers apart. Others spread out from oases towards seasonal grazing grounds and temporary water sources. The result is an ancient transport network without asphalt, but with extremely clear landmarks. And this is a real photograph of tombs on the black volcanic field of Kbar. The pale stone forms stand out sharply against the basalt. Imagine how they looked immediately after construction. Fresh stone, clean geometry, and a long row of monuments visible from a great distance. A structure like this does not simply contain a dead person. It announces its presence to the entire landscape. Here is a real photograph of tombs near the intersection of routes. Ancient lines and modern vehicle tracks pass almost beside one another. People continue choosing convenient paths through the same terrain that guided movement thousands of years ago. And here we encounter a very tempting trap for any storyteller. It is easy to combine Mustatils, desert kites, and funerary avenues into one mysterious empire. To claim that one unknown people built everything at once and then vanished without a trace. No, these discoveries belong to different periods. They may have been created by different communities. Mustatils are mainly associated with the 6th and 5th millennia BCE. The earliest desert kites appeared even earlier, and many funerary avenues were used actively in the 3rd millennium BCE. But that does not make the story weaker. Quite the opposite. In front of you is the final real aerial photograph of a funerary route. Dozens of monuments stretch in a single line across an enormous open landscape. This is not the trace of one lost super-civilization. It is evidence that people repeatedly transformed the desert into organized space. First, they marked sacred places with rectangular structures. Then they built hunting traps whose operation had to be coordinated across kilometers. Later, they connected oases with routes lined by the graves of their ancestors. So what exactly challenges the familiar version of history here? We usually imagine complex organization as a result of the city. First come houses, storage buildings, rulers, writing, and taxes. Only after that do large public projects appear. But northwestern Arabia shows us a different sequence. First comes a shared idea, a shared ritual, a place people travel to from far away, a coordinated hunt, a spatial plan, a road understood by different groups.
Memory fixed permanently in stone. The cities, kings, and written records come later. That is why these low walls matter so much. They do not look like pyramids. They do not impress us with their height. Most of the time, a person could walk straight past them and notice nothing at all. But if you rise into the air, excavate one tiny chamber, and bring together all 31 real images, the desert stops looking empty. What we see is a region inhabited across thousands of years by herders, hunters, builders, and travelers. People without a state, but not without society. Without writing, but not without complex knowledge. Without cities, but already possessing architecture, ritual, and roots extending across hundreds of kilometers. And perhaps the most important question is not how they managed to build all of this. It is why we remained so certain for so long that without a city, human beings were almost incapable of achievements like these. What do you think? Were mustatils places of worship, communal feasts, agreements between separate groups, or all of those things at once? Write your own interpretation. Because only a small number of more than 1,600 structures have been excavated so far, and the next tiny chamber could completely change this story.